Welcome to Talent Talks, quick-fire questions to get to know leaders in recruitment. I'm Tom, founder and CEO here at Pinpoint, and today I'm joined by Stephen Reilly, the global talent lead who's recently launched TA4TA, which promises to use TA expertise to help curate opportunities for TA professionals and connect them with closely matched TA pros. It's a free service, and Stephen's aim is to help everybody navigate what's often a very difficult environment at the moment. Stephen's also got a great deal of experience at director level in recruitment, so lots to learn from there and really looking forward to digging in. Stephen, thanks for joining me. You good to go?
Yeah, absolutely. Far away, Tom.
Happy days. Thank you, mate. TA4TA, we were talking about this before we hit record. I think there's a lot of super interesting stuff you're doing, and we're super proud to be associated with that. I think it'd be great to just get a 60-second summary of why you started this in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's probably just the situation that we're in. We know that talent acquisition or recruitment as an industry, it's a profession, and recruitment is not easy. That's why we have the profession. And then as the market's bounced up and down, almost like doctors trying to diagnose themselves, it was, I don't think that TA gets the best service from ourselves to help place, even from taking a brief from a CPO, when there isn't an internal TA team to help the business hire internal TA people. So it was almost, while the market's as it is, are we not some of the best people to help organisations take briefs and recruit? And especially as I think the industry is going to change a bit, which I'm sure we'll dig into, whether it's more contractors or fractional or on demand or embedded, we need to give ourselves a bit more support, I think. And hence, that's where TA4TA was established with one of my business partners.
Yeah, great. Look, a lot resonates there. And as you say, we'll dig into some of those kind of thematic concepts in a second. I think always interested before we dig into sort of shop talk, just understanding more about you and you as a person. Like, you've been in the talent space for some time now, but if you weren't in talent, you got any idea what you'd be doing instead?
Oh, well, I studied engineering at university and then fell into recruitment, as most people do.
I was going to say that.
So I think it'd probably be in tech, in product development. I think originally it was more around the product design, as in physical product. But I think certainly in more recent years, I'm still quite creative. So I would expect it would be in feature-led design in some shape or form, I would have thought. If you've got a job going, Tom.
I was about to say, and we'll talk after. Maybe there won't be a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Yeah, no, we'll definitely talk after. Cool. Let's dig into some of those themes you talked about. And one I want to narrow in on, just to set the tone for a lot of the conversations. I think we talk a lot about the disparity sometimes between TA and leadership, and demonstrating the value of TA and it still being seen as a cost center and so on and so forth. I think from your perspective, what do you think we should be doing as recruiters or sort of recruitment folks to better communicate recruitment's value to leadership?
I think we need to reframe it. I think we've been really good at marking our own homework, so to speak, and demonstrating our value in our language. So if you imagine, if I was a TA leader, I would talk to my team about time to hire, cost per hire, and those things were really important to business leaders and still are. And then we have our metrics of how we manage ourselves internally. But ultimately, I don't think that demonstrates the real value TA has to an organisation. So I think we probably need to start thinking about how we monitor ourselves or report ourselves, how much time we spend with the business, what impact we have to the brand for sales for an organisation is ultimately driven by sometimes how much the TA folk are out in the public space. So I think possibly not focus so much on our internal metrics and expect our business leaders to see the value of TA through those, but start to understand what the business leaders really need to understand the job that we actually do, which is more than hiring. It is far more than making that offer and the metrics to make that offer. It's far more of this wraparound service that the TA team provide.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with that. And I think there's just a lot of translation that needs to happen, but that's often missing, right? And I think helping recruiters build their business vernacular or learn to speak leadership is something that we've got a lot of passion for internally, and we're trying to build content around.
But I think as well, we're naturally inquisitive. I think recruiters generally are inquisitive. So we ask a lot of our hiring managers. We ask a lot of questions of our candidates, which is part of our screening. We ask a lot of our peers with regard to technology and what to use. We're great networkers, but we don't often ask the question of our leadership team. If we were as inquisitive with them as we are with everyone else that we touch within our day to day, I think we would understand their requirements more, and naturally we would start, like you said, the vernacular, we would start talking their language. I think we've just got to ask the question.
Yeah, it's a really good way of framing the problem, actually. There's a lot to unpick there, and I think we're going to come on to some of those themes in a second. But I think if we look at some of the broader macro challenges that we talked about, we know this big problem at the moment, and I think TA4TA plays heavily into it, which is this idea of the TA function being disposable. And we'll come on to this idea that you've already touched on about fractional or a bit of talent and the different resourcing models there. But I guess parking that for a second, what do you see as the other sort of big challenge facing talent leaders today in 2024?
Part of it will be where we see ourselves going. And probably, and this I think as an industry, I think we're starting to polarize a little bit of people that maybe are out of work and they're trying to do more. The people that are in work are very much keeping their heads down because of what's around the corner. And I think probably being able to navigate that when the market picks up, we're going to have to be really mature. And even though it is commoditized a little bit at the moment, as soon as things get busy, we can't go back to what we were doing, which was let's get really busy and start measuring ourselves on the number of hires. We naturally will, because we're going to be busy and we're going to go, great, we can do our jobs again really well. And here are the stats of how we do it. I think the challenge will be getting out of that mindset and actually being more mature, either business leaders or that wraparound service, understanding what it is and talking about it. I don't want us to fall into that trap of, great, we're really busy again and we're really needed because we're driving growth of a business. Go, but you're also business partnering. You're also supporting your hiring managers. You're also doing all these other things. Let's make sure we know how to measure. And yeah, obviously that goes back to the reporting, but I think it will be almost a behavior element that when we get busy, that we've just got to go, let's just think back 6 months and make sure we're building this into our day to day.
Totally true. You touched on reporting, and I think one of my big things, because I'm a nerd that came into recruitment late, right? And I think one of the big challenges or pieces of friction is this concept of data literacy and perhaps the lack thereof in a lot of talent teams and HR folks. It's just a set of skills and a sort of a requirement that they've not necessarily had to live by before. And I guess, yeah, reporting plays a big part into that. One of the things you just talked to thematically is this idea of avoiding the yin and the yang, right? Like we've gone from one extreme to the other, and how do we pick up and learn from the lessons of that?
Yep.
I'm a very boring individual, and I was reading Gartner reports this morning, and it's very interesting kind of looking at volume, because essentially the long and short of their labor market report is hiring volume is certainly down from peak levels and labor mobility is down, but it's actually still meaningfully higher than it was pre-pandemic, right? And I think people sometimes forget that. And actually what we don't want to do is find ourselves stuck in this purgatory state in the middle. And so talking to reporting and data literacy and trying to avoid a repeat of what we've seen before, what are the hiring metrics or kind of other qualitative stuff that you think talent leaders should be paying attention to that they're probably not at the moment?
So one I was talking about the other day, that's a really good question, because there could be hundreds. But I think when we're going through these changes, and just jump back to the kind of commodity bit, is if we continue just to look at metrics that are based on that hiring, we will always be measured on hiring. And when the hiring levels aren't there, we have no worth. But if you actually look at, let's say how much time I would spend. So I was just working a role. I'm a recruiter, I'm working a role. It's always, what's your rec count? How many have you got? What's your time to hire? And those kind of metrics. But if you actually then flipped it and said, while I was hiring that one role, how many conversations did I have with my hiring manager? How much time did I spend on the phone? How many times in meetings talking them through candidates, advising them, supporting them? Maybe how many Slack messages I've sent to that one hiring manager through this single hire. So even though our kind of metrics would be, right, one hire, what's the source of hire? What did it cost? If you actually said, I am actually a business partner, where then when we look at HR, you say you've got your HR business partners and they're measured on their business partner and potentially their outcomes. What about the amount of time that TA people spend coaching the business or coaching leaders? And I think if some of that data, we actually said, look, this is the amount of time that we help your organization transverse their own management, even talking to them. Who have you got in your team? Do you need someone else stronger in the team? Do you want someone more junior that can support X, or someone that can step up maybe when you're on holiday? That kind of business partnering is absolutely vital that TA do as part of a wraparound service when you're hiring someone. But it's never talked about. It's almost, that's an HR, that's part of the people team. They do business partnering. So I think from that perspective, and again, financial modeling with the finance team, or looking at those reports, I think would help us really get on the front foot. And in particular, and you might ask this a little bit later, if we could drag some of that data and some of that reporting out, when things pick up and organizations are going to think about hiring, maybe they'll then start to engage TA sooner, or start building their TA team sooner, before they actually need the actual hiring, because they know our value is supporting about what the hires will actually need to be, and shape the teams to really push an organization forward.
It really goes all the way back to workforce planning, and even further back than that to buy versus build analogy, and all of the kind of bits that underpin that, right? And I think it's interesting of framing it, because the business partnering bit's not talked about enough. As you say, I think that conversation is often relegated to the post-hire world and some of that life cycle management stuff, rather than actually looking at it. And I think there's this perception, wrongly, that most talent functions are still heavily reactive to just demands thrown upon them by the rest of the business. But actually, what you're saying is there's quite a lot of cases where TA is having more of an outsized impact on the reactive demands than is made obvious. And perhaps there's a behavioural change, but we also just need to do a better job of documenting the impact that we're having at those early stages, right?
It's chicken and egg. And this is the point, that when we get really busy, we will be back to filling demand. But ultimately, we should be involved right at the top of the funnel, saying, before you create the demand, are we even thinking it's the right demand in the right areas based upon market conditions? Who's best to tell you about market conditions? It's the ones that are talking to the external candidates day in, day out at your competitors. But that's not seen as a valuable flow through only at the point of hiring. That should be part of the business planning at an executive level. Tell us what our competitors are doing. Tell us who's going to be hot. How are we going to react to this market when we come to start, either continue hiring or start hiring? That should be part of the strategic conversation well before the demand's there.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think people continue to underweight or undervalue the second order benefits of some of those kind of frontline recruiter conversations in terms of market intelligence, in terms of benchmarking and other things. And I think my frustration sometimes, and you've identified the different language or the different sort of methodology often used by recruiters and leadership. And I like how you framed it as sort of marking your own homework. But I think one of the things we're super interested in doing is trying to support recruiters, bring data to that conversation with leadership. And so, like, examples of that, we're trying to work quite hard at the moment on our trends dashboards to give recruiters actually live, up to the minute, comparable benchmarking data on their sector, on their organizational size, their geography, for kind of key metrics, so they can bring that data to the table and go, hey, like, we're actually quite far behind the standard here. We need to go do something about it. Do you know what I mean? Because I find sometimes you can have that conversation in a sort of fluffy, subjective way, or you can bring real information.
And I think that's a bit about, like you said earlier, using data in the right way. You've got to be able to take and understand and curate the right data, but when you present it, then it's about the right narrative for your audience. And you can't sit there and just talk data to a leadership team. You've got to talk about, this is the data, this is the nuance, and this is the impact, and these are some options that you might want to take to either capitalize or mitigate. And that's business language. It's really difficult to do. And I think the industry generally needs a lot of support, like you're saying, just helping show that data journey and turning it into a narrative that changes the conversation.
A, the industry needs support. I think B, it's hard to know. It's like this sort of unconscious incompetence, right? It's hard to know what you don't know.
100%.
And I think once you've become consciously incompetent, you understand, hey, some data would be valuable here, or I can shape a narrative to leadership that they'll understand. And the second piece is, and my big worry as the sort of resident nerd, is a lot of people are using benchmarking data or comparable data that is from 2020 or 2021 or even earlier. And the problem is the market has evolved so much since then that it's actually dangerous to do that. You're using a set of data that paints a completely different picture than the reality that we're using today. And then you set yourself up for failure. And the last thing we want is for TA to be taken seriously and given the time of day by leadership and given this sort of strategic role, and then squander that opportunity by using stuff that just doesn't make sense. And it's why we care a lot about this. But it's interesting to see how it pans out. I think one of the things I want to move to is there's this theme about recruiters demonstrating value and becoming indispensable and making sure it's clear that they're less of a volatile resource you should be turning up and down and more something a bit more strategic. I feel like we've touched on that enough. What I'm interested in is what's your advice to recruiters, and do you have any kind of resources or platforms or places to go if I'm a recruiter looking to improve in these areas? Where do I go learn?
So if you know what you're looking for, there's always resource, whether it's white papers or go to industry events and that kind of thing. But I think the most important thing at the moment is give yourself free time to be creative and explore. And do that with peers or mentors. Don't be afraid to reach out. And also find a place where you can be really vulnerable. So I certainly don't have all the answers. And we touched on it the other day when we spoke, which was I have a walk and talk with a peer, and there's no real agenda, but there's something that's going on in the industry. We've got a little problem. We don't have the answers, but we bounce some ideas off each other. And then funny enough, I can remember having a conversation with John. And then 3 months later, I had a conversation with him this morning. And I was like, oh, I've worked this out. And this is from the conversation that we had 3 months ago. That was, we knew that there was something wrong, say in the industry, in the sector, maybe with data, with something that didn't quite make sense. And it's taken me 3 months of different conversations, but that started it. So I think don't think that you can necessarily go to a training course or a white paper and now suddenly you're the expert, especially again with things around where we're moving with AI and tech stacks of depth and breadth and the future of where TA will be. Don't think that there's a white paper that's good. Don't think that there's a single podcast that within half an hour you're now an expert. You've got to have 20, 30, 40 conversations with lots of different people and get those opinions and just generally be inquisitive. And I think that's where either the up and coming leaders or some of those people are like, what's the future of TA? We'll have 20 conversations and you'll work it out. You'll absolutely work it out.
No, I think that's sound advice, actually. I appreciate that. I've got two more questions on big picture, future stuff, AI and the future of TA, and some closing advice. But before we do that, always interested in digging into the you a little bit more. Two questions in that arena, right? So one, we talk about future leaders and professional development and training. What's the biggest lesson you think you've learned so far over the course of your career?
I guess to be humble sometimes and know when you don't know it. When you're coming up through your career, there is sometimes a requirement to be the one at the table that knows what's going on. So it's probably about being vulnerable in the right way to the right audience, because that's when you can just step back and reset. It's really hard in a professional environment to sit in a business meeting where you're meant to be the expert and say, actually, I don't know. But I think as you grow in confidence, I'm doing that more and more. So I don't know the answer, but I know what questions to ask. So let me go and ask the right questions to the right people, multiple sources, and then I'll come back. So I guess that for me is probably what I've learned, which is tough to do. It's tough to do.
I love that. And I think people massively, again, underweight the delta between unconscious incompetence and just conscious incompetence. And I'm very comfortable with my conscious incompetence, right? And I think that's often actually the biggest distinction between good and bad leadership, right? Is just owning the fact that you know what you don't know and finding the people to help you solve it. And actually, the more and more people I speak to, and especially as, and I don't want to overstate the impact of it, but this generational shift in attitude towards work, I think authenticity, being quote unquote real, just having a conversation, demonstrating trust and autonomy with people is as big as anything.
Well, I totally agree. And through TA Talks, I was talking to some, let's just say, some younger, less experienced recruiters that were looking to me for advice and expecting me to be this amazing TA person that knew everything. I was going, you realize that 90% of your job, I can't do. I can't do the wonderful whizzy things that you can do and come out with these amazing results. And they were almost like, well, what do you mean? I go, no, I've lost those skills. I'm doing something different. You are better than me. And I couldn't get that concept. And that's the kind of humble bit of, we all have these different skills, and you only make a successful team if you know the bits that you're not so good at and things that you are good at, and you piece things together and support people through that narrative. because that's ultimately how, as a team, you're able to produce the results that you need to.
That's it. And a lot of people, myself included, find that road and that transition from doing the work to deciding what work to do as quite difficult. Right. And I think people at the first step don't understand what the second step looks like. And I think people at the second step forgot what the first step looks like. And so trying to keep a hand in both camps is a valuable exercise. The final very personal question that has nothing to do with TA, but I just can't not ask is, if you could have a coffee with any historical figure of any capacity, who would you speak to and what would you discuss?
Oh, this is, in fact, because it's right at the front. This is going to make me seem like an absolute lunatic, but I was in the pub yesterday, just come back from holiday, with an old school friend discussing an amazing podcast, Evil Genius, Russell Kane, and they've got a great episode about Genghis Khan. Now, clearly, he's a mass murdering butcher across Mongolia. But then the reason of the podcast, they pick it apart. He actually planted loads and loads of trees. And so actually his impact to the environment is amazing. Yeah, probably Genghis Khan, which makes me mental. But yeah, so many layers to, we know just this one little bit, obviously, of a tyrant and a mass butcher. But all these other things that are below it. Yeah, Genghis Khan. There you go.
I love that. I love that. Look, I think you can learn a great deal about somebody by asking that question. And my limited Genghis Khan knowledge is, emphasis on limited. But I seem to remember that I think there was like 2,000 people or something that attended his funeral, and then all 2,000 of them were killed, so that nobody knew where he was buried. And then the person who killed the 2,000 killed themselves, so that nobody knew where he was buried. And ultimately, still nobody knows where the guy's bloody buried. And so, like, the mass murderer thing, I think there was not enough emphasis on
that's
in your back. But yeah, I love it. I love it. But yeah, I do think that's interesting. Even the hint there at the trees thing, people often focus on one element of an individual and miss the other stuff. And I'm not justifying his mass murdering, but it's like a very interesting answer to the question.
And that's it. And I think it is the park that, very different time and different part of the world and everything. But this is like being inquisitive and pulling back those layers and then actually seeing that there's an impact in a very different way.
Love it. Thank you for that. It's made my day, that. Last question. And I know it's a cliche one, but we have to talk about it, especially because I'm a nerd. AI. So I speak to lots of people every day. AI still forms a significant part of that conversation. We talk about the future of TA. I think, like, where do you see AI playing a role and what do you think of that?
I think we would all agree it's going to be massive over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I think probably you asked a question earlier about kind of skills and things. I think in the next year, there has to be a real drive on probably 2 areas. One is TA leaders thinking about their tech stack and ethics and supporting the business. Just because it can doesn't mean you should, right? You could plug in 30 things that are all going to fully automate a system and learn from it and place these people. There's got to be that, is that the right thing to do? Where should the human interaction come? So I think from a TA leadership perspective, I think we're going to have a really interesting time where we've got to be inquisitive and ring people up and ask what they think. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think then for the practitioners of the world, your recruiters doing the day-to-day, if everyone can buy the same tech in the same tech stack, it starts to be, how do then those people on the coalface use it? And much the same, if everyone's got the same whizzy thing, what differentiates you? So I think it goes back to, you're going to have some, in recruitment, you're probably going to have some really successful technologists on the coalface, which could be in research or whatever else, digging out exactly what you need and using that tech stack and the tools available to do a really advanced job, whether that be in finding people or engaging people or putting adverts in front of people that really match their requirements. I think from a leadership perspective, it's going to be, where are we going to allow the brilliance of recruiters to actually perform those roles, whatever they will be. And you might be able to put in a bit of tech that is able to schedule 30 interviews with 30 people because it can review people's diaries and everything. Doesn't mean you need 30 interviews. Doesn't mean you actually need that many on the panel. In fact, you might even question, if we need a tool to help schedule these interviews, are we doing too many interviews? So I think that's going to be a real balance of technologists using the tools that are available and TA leaders actually constructing their tech stack in the right way, rather than it just be a shiny thing. You've got to use it. Make sure you've got the essence right and the ethics right before you plug it in.
Love it. And a great way to wrap up. I heard you say two things very articulately there. One was this theme of what I'm going to just call commoditization and the risk of commoditization, right? If everybody's got the same tools and the same shiny whiz bang things, how do you differentiate? And I think we've lent in already in this conversation around authenticity and the importance of that, not just as a sort of leadership thing or an internal thing, but as an external employer brand at the very earliest stages of recruitment. And I think there's a risk, and I see this risk very prevalently, that lots of organizations rush to deploy the shiny same thing everybody else is doing, whether that's automatic writing of job descriptions or interview questions or scorecard assessments or whatever, and they just end up looking even more similar than they are today. And I think that's nothing but a bad thing, and the people who avoid doing that will end up winning. And then the second thing I have to say, which I won't even try to elaborate on because I think is great, is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I like that.
Yeah.
Cool. Look, Stephen, this has been great. Thank you so much. We got through 10 questions. Really appreciate your time. Everybody else, you'll find Stephen on LinkedIn. We'll also put links to TA4TA and everything else he's working on. So you can go find out more about upcoming stuff. If you'd like to join me on Talent Talks, please do reach out and get in touch. And other than that, have a fantastic day. Thank you for listening.
Really enjoyed that conversation. Thanks, Tom.